Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 22nd of May of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about massive drone attack that took place, that started more precisely on the 20th of May of 2025 and ended just this morning. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation provided us additional details about this attack. The Russians reported that when repelling a large-scale Ukrainian drone raid from 8 p.m. of the 20th of May to 8 a.m. of the 22nd of May outside of the zone of the special military operation, Russian air defense systems managed to bring down a total of 485 drones. This number is very huge, obviously. You know that this is a very important piece of news, and let's discuss this in details. Very interesting things I would like to point to your attention. And also the Russians during this report provided us this, let's say, table where we can see number of drones that were brought down over this or that region. For example, over the Belgorod region, the Russians managed to bring down around 26 drones. Over the Oryol region, the Russians destroyed 135 drones. Over Bryansk region, the Russians destroyed 59 drones. Over Kursk region, the Russians destroyed 121 drones. But when talking about this list of towns and settlements and regions, the most important number is this one. And this is the most important number, and this is exactly the task, that is the task of the armed forces of Ukraine during this period of time. According to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, according to official report, since the 20th of May of 2025, the Ukrainians managed to take around 63 drones to the territory of the Moscow region, where they were brought down by the Russian air defense. This is the most important number. So imagine yourself, Ukrainians managed to find a solution how to get the capital of the Russian Federation. The Ukrainians during this period of time launched 485 drones, and 63 of them managed to get the territory of the capital of the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow, which means that currently Ukrainians have possibilities. So their, let's say, effectiveness of their drones is around 10%. So if they send 480 drones, 60 will get the target. But if they send 4,000 drones, most likely 600 will get the target, the city of Moscow. So you know that this is very interesting because the Ukrainians carry out very interesting special operation with this, because during the previous 48 or 36 hours, the Russians, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, were providing the numbers of the effectiveness of work of their air defense system. This is very interesting, let's say, numbers, very interesting information. For example, the Russians reported that by 3 p.m. of the 21st of May, just 3 drones managed to get the territory of Moscow, where they were brought down. So 3 drones by 3 p.m. of 21st of May. When talking about 6 p.m., 4 drones managed to get the territory of Moscow. So almost the same number. When talking about, for example, 8 p.m. of Moscow time, 11 drones managed to get the territory of Moscow, which means that by 8 p.m. of Moscow time, the Russian defense system were weakened already. So the Russians were probably a bit empty. I'm talking about their air defense systems, and most likely the Russians didn't expect this big number of drones that would fly in the direction of the city of Moscow. When talking about 11 p.m., the Russians reported that just 9 drones managed to get the capital of the Russian Federation. But when talking about the period of time during the night between, let's say, 12 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., the Ukrainians managed to get to the territory of Moscow 35 drones, which means that the Russian air defense was completely overloaded. So this is exactly what the Ukrainians were planning to achieve. They wanted to know, and they wanted to show the Western countries what exactly the Western countries, NATO countries, probably the sponsors of Ukraine, should do to begin bombing and attacking the capital of the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow, which obviously can change the situation on the ground. You know that this attack, this situation is very critical, because today, also after these attacks, after all these waves of attacks, the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, was forced to make a very, very important decision. Today, Putin reported that the decision of creation of secure zone was taken. So the Russians decided to create this secure zone, and according to Putin, this secure zone is going to be created along the border between Chernigov, Sumy, Kharkiv regions from the Ukrainian side, and Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk regions of the Russian Federation. So imagine yourself how exactly this situation was, what kind of critical situation the Ukrainians managed to create, that the president of the Russian Federation was forced to make this decision. Another important thing, we need to understand that the Russians currently are at full-scale offensive operation in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk, in the direction of the city of Konstantinovka, along N32 road, along N20 road. And now the Russians are forced to change their plans, and now the Russians need to return back again to the northern directions and to continue in this area. And of course, the Russian offensive operation in the Donbas direction would be probably less active than we used to see probably 2 or 3 or 5 or week ago. Another important thing, of course, is what exactly the Russians are going to do, because as for now we understand that to create a buffer zone, let's say from this point, let's add some some arrows to map, let's say to create buffer zone, let's say from this point starting and ending somewhere in the vicinity of Volchansk and Kharkiv is going to be very difficult. We are talking about thousands of kilometers, and currently the Russians don't have these possibilities. So that is why we expect that the Russians are going to choose the most important direction and to attack this area. So the question is, what is the primary target? Which area is the primary task for the Russians when talking about the creation of the secure zone? And we have answered to this question. To understand where exactly the Russians are going to attack first we need to take a look at this picture that was provided by pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this photo we can see this map shows the approximate flight routes of the drones, and as you can see the biggest number of drones were launched from the northern Sumy region and from the northeastern part of the Chernigov region. So if we return back to this area, the Ukrainians used exactly this part of Ukraine to attack in the direction of the capital of the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow. So from this area the Ukrainians were launching the drones, and we understand this because the distance between this pocket and the city of Moscow itself is just 470 kilometers, which is obviously the shortest distance between territories under complete control of Ukraine and the capital of the Russian Federation. Obviously, this is not so smart to attack, let's say, the city of Moscow, let's say from the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, because when talking about this distance, we're talking about 600 kilometers, almost 50% more. So obviously, this is the main road that Ukrainians used in the past, using now, and are going to use in the future to attack the capital of the Russian Federation. So that is why we expect and we believe that the Russians are going, first of all, to cut this territory, and by attacking this region from the Bryansk region and from the Kursk region. So this is the primary target for the Russians, with the purpose to cut this salient and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. If the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, then they will be able to force Ukrainian launching positions to be moved for at least 150 kilometers deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. So this is the situation in this area. Obviously, this situation will also allow the Russians to establish complete fire control over the main railways that go from the city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, in the direction of the city of Sumy. And obviously from this direction the Russians can move further. And I'll remind you that when talking about the beginning of the special military operation, when the Russians began this operation, they were attacking, and the primary attack of the armored forces of the Russian Federation took place exactly in this area along MO2 road in the direction of the city of Kiev, the city or the capital of Ukraine. So most likely the Russians decided to return back to their plans of 2022, but now they're planning to carry out the same plans but with different technologies, with much more powerful and much more experienced army of 2025. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is very difficult. Now let's move further and let's continue with the Sumy direction. As for the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special regarding clashes or additional progress on the ground. Now let's move further and let's continue with the South Donetsk direction. The Russians during the previous 24 hours published a very important video about in the Zaporozhye direction. Yes, this video was published by pro-Russian resources, and in this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian air defense systems of Patriot. And as a result of multiple Iskander strike, the Ukrainian air defense system was completely destroyed. The Russians reported that at least 2 Patriot launchers were destroyed as a result of this attack. So very important progress. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians attacked the city of Pavlograd with a significant number of drones of Geran type. The sources report about very heavy explosions. Later we got several fire anomalies from this area. Most likely the Russians managed to destroy some warehouses and ammo depots. This is very important attack because, as you can see, the city of Pavlograd lays exactly on the main supply lines that go from the city of Dnipro in the direction of the city by the name of Pokrovsk, which the Russians are trying to attack right exactly these days. So very important logistic hub was attacked by the Russians. Now let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. We have important updates. As we discussed in the previous video, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Gulay Polye. The Russians decided to attack the city of Gulay Polye along 0510 road. We're talking about this strategical stronghold of the armored forces of Ukraine. And according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Zelene Polye and about to take under complete control the village of Novopol. This information today was partially confirmed by the neutral mappers, and this information was completely confirmed by pro-Russian resources. Of course, we are waiting for additional geolocations, and of course we are waiting for the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation report, but we expect that we are going to receive one tomorrow or the day after. So as for the first task for the Russians is the settlement of Uspienovka. If the Russians are able to establish complete control over the village, then we can say that the battle for the city of Gulay Polye has begun. Furthermore, the Russians intensify their activities in the southern part and the southeastern part of the settlement. Several strikes carried out by the Russians in the area of Chervone. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing this settlement with tall flamethrower systems. Maybe the Russians during the upcoming nights are going to test Ukrainian defense in this area with another ground operation. Furthermore, the Russians began bombing and attacking the settlement of Malinovka. And first of all, and telling the truth, all these attacks, all these 2 videos remind me something like artillery preparation. Maybe something huge is going to happen during these upcoming nights. So let's wait and see. The battle for Gulay Polye has begun. As for now, the Russians are too far for the settlement, but obviously the Russians are heading in this direction. Now let's talk about the Kamar direction. There are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Odradne. We have already discussed this video, and in this video we can see how the Russians were trying to propose and suggest Ukrainians in this area to surrender. The Russians were dropping different lists with instruction how to surrender and how to save their lives. We don't know for sure whether there were Ukrainians who accepted this proposal, but one thing we know for sure, that the battle for the settlement of Odradne has begun. According to several pro-Russian resources, the Russians began offensive from the southern direction, and as a result of attack, the Russians took under control the most southern part of the settlement, and the Russians began offensive from the east, and they managed to answer the eastern part as well. So the clashes are taking place right now for the village itself. This village is not so big, so we don't say that Ukrainians are going to hold their positions for a very long period of time. Furthermore, probably this video shows the exact situation with Ukrainian soldiers in this area. In this video we can see how Ukrainians decided to abandon their positions after another wave of Russian artillery strikes, which means that Ukrainians are not going to hold their positions for a very long period of time. Most likely they will fall back from this area in the very near future. So this is the situation in this area. We expect the fall of the village of Odradne during the next 24 hours. When talking about the Novopavlovka direction, we haven't received anything special, nothing new in comparison with the previous video. Once again, today pro-Russian resources published this video, and in this video we can see how Russians established their flag along the border between Dnipro region and the region of Donetsk. This video wasn't geolocated by anybody during the previous 24 hours, so most of the mappers adjusted their maps softly, so expecting that this event took place somewhere here. When talking about Ukrainian sources, they reported that they managed to discover these Russian soldiers and to destroy them as a result of FPV drone attack, but as you can see, without any proofs, without any videos. Anyway, we are not adjusting the map, we don't have enough of proofs, we don't have exact information where exactly the Russians crossed the border. But one thing we know for sure, that the Russians are moving further in the western direction towards the village of Novopavlovka from the east, and the Russians are trying to enter the Dnipro region through the village of Novomikhailivka. As for this area, the Russians entered the eastern part and took under complete control this territory. This information was confirmed at least by pro-Ukrainian and neutral resources. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation along N32 road. We got some important updates. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Poltavka. Furthermore, during the day we got this video that was published by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking and FPV droning Russian positions in this area. So this is the key moment. In this video we can see water is over in the top of this let's say scene, and a building that was destroyed most likely by Ukraine FPV drone attack. This building was geolocated, and this is exactly the area that Ukrainians attacked. This is the reservoir and this is the building. So the author of this video stated that Ukrainians attack positions of the Russian forces. Based on this video and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have colored this territory. So yesterday this territory was considered as a contested area or the Great Zone. Now we have no doubts that the village was secured by the Russians completely. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation further in the northern direction. This information also was confirmed today by neutral mappers, and as you can see, the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to get as close as possible to the settlements of Popov Yar, Poltavka and Rusin Yar. But once again, yes, we understand, and indeed the Russians managed to get significant results in this area, and obviously we understand that the Russians were planning to move further in the northern direction with the purpose probably to cut this territory in two, at least when talking about Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka arc, to establish complete control with this territory, to semi-encircle the city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration, to cut and cordon Ukrainians in the area of Konstantinovka. But now most likely the Russians would be forced to change their plans, because now the Russians are focused on the creation of the secure zone, because they need to reduce the number of Ukrainian drones that are able to get inside, deep inside of the territory of the Russia, especially the territory of the city of the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow. So let's wait and see. We are not saying that the Russians are going to stop their offensive operation in this direction. Most likely the Russians will be forced to slow that down. So we are going to see progress, obviously, but here we are going to see progress as we used to see progress in this area during the Sudzha counter-offensive operation, because probably in the latest part of the Sudzha counter-offensive operation the Russians were very slow. There were very slow clashes for the settlements of Dachno, Lakli, Constantinople. The Russians were moving but not so fast. Now the Russians managed to gain momentum. The Russian offensive once again gained momentum in this area, and now they are forced to stop and to change their plans once again. But obviously sooner or later the Russians would return back to this area, and most likely the Russia's demands will be increased. When talking about the Kliban pocket area itself, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. The Russians were attacking the village of Zarya, Sherbinovka, Novospassky. The Russians were trying to discover for as many as possible Ukrainian positions, especially FPV drone positions, bases and temporary deployment points of the sabotage and reconnaissance group, and when the Russians discovered another position they attacked this area immediately. So this is what is happening right now. The Russians are not in a hurry. They know they need to save their personnel. They need to just first to clear area, and then they will start the ground operation as well. We got lots of icons from the pocket to the southeast of Konstantinovka and to the east of Konstantinovka. During the previous 24 hours the Russians were focused in this area when talking about aviation strikes, artillery strikes, lots of FPV drones, but as you can see, without changes on the ground. The Russians were preparing foothold before possible offensive. We continue receiving updates from the city of Chasiv Yar. Today, several pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian resources confirmed that the central part of the city of Chasiv Yar still remains under complete, still remains 50-50. There are still possibilities for Ukrainians to send troops there, and this is exactly what the Ukrainians are doing. The city, the central part of the city, there are still very heavy clashes in this area. When talking about the Sivers direction, during the previous 24 hours, the main activities took place around the settlement of Serebranka. The Russians established complete FPV drone and artillery control over the main supply lines that go between the city of Siversk itself and the village of Serebranka. The Russians established complete control with this territory with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional forces or to evacuate wounded from the village of Serebranka. Furthermore, we have FPV drone attacks. In this video, we can see how the Russians managed to discover another group of Ukrainians that were moving, let's say, from between the villages, and they were attacked by the Russians. From the north, the Russians are bombing the Serebranka force with total flamethrower systems, trying to clear the passage before further offensive operation in the direction of the river of Seversky Donetsk. A bit further in the southeastern direction, we have another video how the Russians were bombing Ukrainian positions along the river of Seversky Donetsk itself. So we see that the Russians are trying to attack or preparing roads for attack, let's say from the south, from the southeast. The Russians are trying to prepare roads of attacks from the north and from the northeast. The Russians are tasked to take the village of Serebranka first, and then they will move further in the direction of Siversk. So we expect additional changes on the ground around the village of Serebranka. When talking about the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special. When talking about the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special. When talking about the northern directions, the most important once again, the President of the Russian Federation decided to create a buffer zone, a secure zone, and this zone will be located between Bryansk, Chernigov, Sumy, Kursk, Belgorod and Kharkiv regions. So something huge is going to happen, but if you ask our opinion, we expect that first of all the Russians would try to cut this pocket to reduce the pressure on the capital of the Russian Federation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.